What's up, Flannelverse? We are back for Sunday Night Football. We've got the Cowboys and the Steelers. Should be an interesting one. We're missing some players here. Brandon Cook's out for this one. We have Jalen Warren, who's been kind of banged up anyway, but he's out for this one. Cordarrelle Patterson out. Several inactive players, and then of course on the defensive side we have Micah Parsons out. Actually, did not see if Trevon Diggs is out, so let me check that real quick. Check if there were there any other inactives that I'm missing here, because that was kind of the one that I was anticipating might be a thing. Yeah, Russell Wilson inactive as expected. I've not seen any. All right, give me 1 second. We're going to go position by position here, starting with quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends. Not seeing Roman Wilson is out, which I don't think that was unexpected. No big surprises here. So, Cowboys have Deuce Vaughn is out. That's kind of interesting. Didn't know that Deuce Vaughn was likely to miss this one. Micah Parsons out as expected. Looks like Trevon Diggs is active. So there you have it with the inactives news. Again, we'll go quarterbacks. You can see that side of the screen. You can see the positions we're going to go. That's the order we're going to go in here at the end. I'll play around with some lineups, take any questions you have. I'll take questions throughout as we go. While you're coming in, please do like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already done so. Trying to grow this channel, obviously a very small channel. You can see on the bottom of the screen, 3,100 people now. Happy to get over 3,000, but shooting for 5,000 by the end of the season. So if you haven't already subscribed, would appreciate that. I'll jump into it though. We'll get right into the quarterbacks here, and we'll first take a look in the captain spot. We've got Dak Prescott, 8% projected ownership in the captain spot. I like that. I like that number quite a bit. I think I'll be over that. Justin Fields, I think we can sort by ownership here. Justin Fields coming in at 21% projected ownership in the captain spot. Cowboys looking like the better matchup, particularly with Micah Parsons out. Should be an easier matchup for Justin Fields, but that feels like a lot of ownership going to Fields for my taste. I think I'm probably going to be a little bit under that number. Probably get over on some of the other stars in this game, and we will talk about those as we get to them. How's everybody doing today? How are your lineups going? I've been, I always come in Sunday night. I'm a little bit more. I've been thinking about, watching games all day. Harder to get my mind back into this game because I did my write-up last night, but I'm getting there, reminding myself, catching up on my writing from last night, catching up on what we need to talk about here. Vikings killed you. I loved that game. That game went really well. I mean, Garrett Wilson was kind of my flag plant play of the Sunday morning game. That went as well as could have possibly gone. So I was happy with the results. And of course, the Vikings won. So loved the results of that London game. Justin Fields, again, 21% projected ownership in the captain spot. In the flex, we have Fields at 46% ownership. So just getting a ton of ownership makes sense. I mean, 36 yards per game on the ground so far this year. Already has 3 rushing touchdowns on the year. We kind of know what Justin Fields is. He's a guy who has huge upside. We also know that he has big downside. So on a single game slate, I think we lean into you want to go for those omega upside guys, and they tend to go a little bit over owned sometimes on single game slates, the boom bust type players, because we also know Justin Fields could very easily just score 11 fantasy points and not be somebody you actually want in your lineup. So I think, even though I know the upside is there, he could absolutely break the slate. I think I'm gonna be a little bit underweight on Justin Fields. Probably about even with the field in the flex. I think 46% feels about right, but in the captain spot, I imagine I'll be a little bit light on 21% Fields. One nice thing about Fields, you don't need to correlate him at all. If you play him in the flex, you can certainly play him there without any pass catchers. He has that kind of rushing upside where he can just score most of his points on the ground. In the captain spot, you can also run him out without any pass catchers. Like he's definitely one of the handful of quarterbacks in the league that I would be willing to play in the captain spot without any pass catchers. I'm still more inclined to have at least one pass catcher in the flex if I have him in the captain spot. Again, not forcing it, but if you're hand building, I would still probably recommend having at least one pass catcher in the flex. Appreciate your Showdown article. If I play 4 studs, would you recommend one of your value plays and one of your differentiated plays, or both differentiated plays? I think you'd be fine going with one value and one differentiated. I think that is totally fine. If you don't even need to have one value in every lineup. You just need to. I'd recommend pulling at least one lever to make sure that you're not going to be duped, 150 times. So that can be leaving salary on the table. Like, you don't even need to play one of those differentiator plays if you're leaving enough salary on the table, playing kind of unique construction. But yeah, I think you'd be totally fine if you want to go with 4 studs, one differentiated play, and one value play. I think that's a totally reasonable way to play it. Yep, already Micah Parsons is out. Trevon Diggs is in, and we'll take a look at the. Already says Diggs will be on Pickens. He's their only good corner. He does sometimes like go for interception. At least this is my impression. I don't watch every Cowboys game, but my impression of Diggs is he goes for the interception sometimes and does allow big plays from time to time. We'll take a look at the wide receiver cornerback matchup grid when we get to wide receivers, but still finishing out quarterbacks here. So again, I hesitate to say I'll be underweight on Fields captain. I'm going to have some. I'll probably have 15% or something like that. I'm just probably going to boost other positions, maybe be a little bit underweight Fields captain, just because it is a bit much, and he certainly has the capability of dudding. We also have Dak Prescott, 8% captain ownership. I like that quite a bit. So I imagine I'll, even that out a bit. Maybe I'll get to 13, 14% Dak Prescott, 15% Justin Fields, be a little bit closer than the field is. It's a tougher matchup. That the Steelers defense, really good. The Cowboys have been not quite as good this year, and they're missing Micah Parsons. So it's definitely a tougher matchup for Dak Prescott. But he's capable of putting up a big game on anybody, so not a huge concern there. Looking at this is, and if you haven't been catching my shows this week, this is new this week. You can look at schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed per game to various positions, and then even broken up within some positions. This is at fantasy points. So I'm going to take a look. Where is Dallas and Pittsburgh? Pittsburgh looks like it is actually not as bad as I thought it was. Looks like there may be the 13th worst matchup for quarterbacks. So not a great matchup for Dak Prescott, but one that I think he can thrive in. It's not one that I would be targeting, like if this is on the main slate, but certainly can put up fantasy points on Pittsburgh. So not an awful matchup. And then Dallas, actually closer than I thought it was. Dallas looks like they are about middling, slight positive matchup for Justin Fields. Now again, this is just based on what has happened so far this year. This is schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed. So it's schedule adjusted based on you don't just want to look at the raw total. You want to look at what have the matchups been, are they doing well against good offenses? Are they allowing a bunch of fantasy points to bad offenses? That kind of stuff. So it's all adjusted for the teams they have played. But it also does not factor in the fact that Micah Parsons is out for this game, which could be impactful. So it is a better matchup, certainly for the Steelers than it is for the Cowboys. With all that said, I'm going to be a little bit higher on Dak Prescott and a little bit lower on Justin Fields in the captain spot. In the flex, we have the ownership at Dak coming in at 43.5%, Fields coming in 46%. That seems more right. I think I'll probably be close with the field on quarterbacks in the flex. And with Dak, always stacking them up no matter where I have him in the lineup. Even if he's in the flex, always want to have at least one pass catcher with Dak. If I have him in the captain spot, would prefer to have multiple pass catchers. Just doesn't really have the same kind of rushing upside that Justin Fields had. So would prefer to, and let's see, what is he? 5.3 rushing yards per game this season so far with one rushing touchdown. Just not very good. I think it's been usually like 15 rushing yards per game the past couple of years for Dak. So, probably going to be some regression, positive regression for Dak at some point, but still just not much of a rusher. So I would always stack. I think that's enough on the quarterbacks. Let's move on, talk about some running backs here. So you can see there's a gap here. Najee Harris, 8,800, not that much more expensive than Rico Dowdle, but 8 fantasy points better than Dowdle in terms of projection. Has a great matchup. Also, the Steelers going to be without both of Jaylen Warren. I mentioned at the top row, Jaylen Warren and Cordarrelle Patterson both out for the Steelers. So their backup running backs are Aaron Shamplin, who was a substitute teacher as of last year. Undrafted free agent is and projected here for 4.6 fantasy points. I don't know if they're really going to use these backup running backs. I think they're interesting fantasy plays. We'll talk about them a little bit, but I would assume the Steelers are not planning on using a ton of Shamplin. I think it's probably going to be Najee Harris mostly. Oh, and actually, hang on one second. Do we not get practice squad call up? So that was something I meant to look into. Again, this is on Sundays. I'm so busy during the day that it's tougher, but let me take a look, because I think we were expecting a call up for another running back. Who is the other running back on the Steelers? That'd be interesting if they did not call up. Oh, Jonathan Ward. Was Jonathan Ward called up from the practice squad? Because he would be the other, backup running back in consideration here who might get a little bit of run. All right, where are we? Okay. It looks like, the Steelers did, they did this yesterday. So we already knew this. Jonathan Ward was elevated to the roster. So another running back who's available. He is the Stoneman 200 also. So we do have a couple backup running backs here for the Steelers. Shamplin and Ward will both be available. Let's see if RotoGrinders has a projection. I would assume they have a projection for Ward here. Yeah, Jonathan Ward. I mean, not a big projection here. Sub 2 fantasy point projection. 11% projected ownership here at RotoGrinders. I'm curious if that is similar elsewhere. And then we have Shamplin at similar projection, 5% ownership. Shamplin more expensive. He's 2,000, where Jonathan Ward is 200. Unclear if Shamplin is necessarily going to play ahead of Ward. I would assume so, because he's been on the active roster. Let's take a look at the bell cow report from last week. So last week we did have Cordarrelle Patterson in here also. Sort by week. Shamplin was active, played 12 snaps, took 1 carry, ran 19% of routes, ran 8 routes. So on 12 total snaps, 1 rushing attempt and 8 routes run. So he was kind of involved when he was there. He probably plays ahead of Jonathan Ward, just given that he was already on the roster. You would think that would be their preference. Let's start with Najee. Najee going to be pretty chalky here, and he probably should be pretty chalky. Already kind of an exploitable matchup for Cowboys running backs. And actually, let me pull up schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to the running back position. The Cowboys, you can see here, are like 8th, 7th in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. So great spot already. And now Micah Parsons out just makes it that much better for the Steelers. So we have a lot of reasons to like Najee Harris this week. It's a great matchup. As far as like the matchups in this game, one of the better matchups for a position player. You've got Cordarrelle Patterson out. You've got Jaylen Warren out. Probably just going to take on 90% of the workload for the Steelers. Who knows for sure, but that's kind of what you might expect here with the other two guys who get a lot of run out, that it might be just the Najee Harris show in a great matchup. So he's going to be chalky as a result. And we can take a look at the ownership here in the flex. We've got Najee at 42%. So not crazy. And he's also only 8.8K. So not a bad price tag. 42% in the flex. At captain, we've got Najee at 16% ownership. Yeah, I mean, it's chalky. It's not to the point where I want to really fade it. I think I'm probably going to be close to where the field is on Najee. I think those numbers kind of feel about right. There's certainly paths to failure. I don't think that he is the type of running back that I would ever say, like, there's no way this fails. I mean, we didn't do that well last week, right, against the Colts in what should have been an amazing matchup. So I think it's a fine play. I don't think it's I'm going to be jamming above the field. I think probably I am close to the field on chalky Najee. I think he's, the situation is too good to completely ignore, to really want to get away from it too much. So yeah, I'll probably be right with the field on Najee, not taking any major stand there. If I were going to go one direction or the other, I probably would be a little bit light, just because, you can see the clear path to failure. It is a lot of ownership, again, 16 and like 42%. Feels about right. Yeah, I guess I'm not gonna take a stand one way or the other. I'm probably gonna be slightly over 50% Najee Harris in my lineups overall. Feels fine. Maybe I'll be a little bit light in the captain spot, but it's again running back. You don't need to correlate with anybody. You're not funneled into the same builds like you would be if you're playing a quarterback there. A lot of positives go in there for Najee. So I'm into it. I'm going to play a good amount of Najee Harris. As far as the other running backs go, I mean, your guess is as good as mine. But my guess would be Aaron Shamplin is the backup, and Jonathan Ward is just probably won't play unless there's a blowout or an injury or something like that. Aaron Shamplin, I mean, it's promising to me that he did actually see a little bit of run last week. Looking at the bell cow report from last week, the fact that he actually played 12 snaps, had a carry, ran 8 routes, like that's all pretty promising. I think maybe he will actually just step into that kind of RB2 role for the Steelers, maybe get a little bit of run. I'm not necessarily counting on it, but I love that he maybe has some standalone value at 2,000. I mean, if they are going to keep the same kind of rotation they had before with Najee Harris and Jalen Warren, or at least theoretically, we haven't really seen it this year because Warren's been banged up. But I guess Najee Harris and Cordarrelle Patterson, they have shown that they want to use multiple running backs. I don't know if that's going to hold up with Patterson and Najee Harris and Jalen Warren out, but there's a good chance that Shamplin gets some run here. So I do think he probably has some standalone value, and then he has obvious contingent value. I think that he would just step in and be the next man up if something happened to Najee Harris. I think in a blowout, he certainly would get some run. I wouldn't expect them to sit him in a blowout. So yeah, I like Shamplin quite a bit. And the ownership pretty low. I mean, projecting here, I can't. Here, let me look around the industry a little bit because that seems really low to me. Maybe it's real. I mean, this is a name that I didn't know before I started researching this slate. Had never heard of Shamplin, so I imagine a lot of other people probably would not have heard of him either. So maybe that does drive down the ownership a little bit. He is going to get, people will be talking about him in content. No, who scored 0 for you in the Vikings Jets showdown? Try to remember who was in play, who did not actually do anything. Yeah, I can't think of who that would be. Maybe Jalen Naylor. Did Naylor do nothing? Okay. So Shamplin, I do like. Let me take a look real quick where other places have him in terms of ownership, because that does obviously make a difference. Yeah, single digit. It's looking like across the industry. I think he's a solid single digit play. I do think we have a number of plays that are players that look pretty good for with single digit ownership. Like I think that Lupke, we'll talk about him a little bit, but Darnell Washington, we just have a number of plays that I think are pretty interesting. So it's not going to be like a situation where he's the one play that you can play who's not getting ownership, who's interesting. You got Kelvin Austin, just a number of Van Jefferson, a number of pretty good plays under 20%, some under 10%. So I like it. I think I'll reach around 10% ownership on Shamplin, but it's not a like absolute smash because who knows if he has any standalone value. He might be just contingent upside, and because they could just go with Najee Harris the entire game, and even if he does see some run, no guarantees that he does a lot with it. Ryan Flournoy, we'll talk about Flournoy when we get to wide receivers. I'm a little bit torn on whether he's in play. I think he's still their like wide receiver 5. Some positive coach speak this week for Flournoy, so he might be, if you want to do a bullet in a 150 set, I'd probably have a few shares at least in a 150 set, but there's a real chance that he does not play much. Anyway, we'll finish off Steelers running backs first, and then talk about Cowboys running backs, get to wide receivers after. So outside of Shamplin, I mean, Jonathan Ward, again, coming in a little bit higher owned. So Shamplin, part of the appeal there is he's coming in at single digit ownership. Jonathan Ward, I think was projected here for like 11% ownership. Yeah, 11% projected ownership here. Actually, let me look at that elsewhere also, because that is, I don't know, he's 200, so it's not the worst thing. Yeah, projected for single digits elsewhere. I think there's my guess would be that Jonathan Ward does not have any standalone value. Could be totally wrong about that. I mean, but they called him up from the practice squad. I think he probably plays behind Champlin, and I think probably Najee Harris just gets the bulk of carries. So I think Jonathan Ward is almost entirely contingent upside. But again, this is a situation we haven't seen it yet, so we don't really know. But he was called up from the practice squad. I wouldn't expect him to get a ton of run. I think he's fine at 5% ownership, wherever, right around there. I think that is a reasonable number to me. Not like not a jam him kind of play. He's 200, so that's part of the appeal is 200 not going to kill you if he does get the 0 that he's probably going to get, but also he's probably going to get 0. So hard to really want to play a ton more than I think 5% is probably about right for Jonathan Ward. I think I prefer Champlin, all things considered, just because he's getting the same low ownership, but I think more likely to have a standalone role. And I think it would benefit more probably in a situation where something happens to Najee. I think that probably it would be Champlin would get, be more likely to get that great standalone value. So to me, if I'm deciding between those backup running backs, it would be Champlin for me over Jonathan Ward. But I think Jonathan Ward 5%, if I'm 150 maxing, I would probably have some exposure to Jonathan Ward. Just not like not one of my favorite low owned plays, because I think there's such a real possibility for him to be a virtual 0. Okay, let's move on and talk about, I'm just pulling up some other projections here, taking me a minute to get here, but I want to just double check different places, because I think you could see very different, and similar elsewhere. So we are seeing single digit ownership on both Jonathan Ward and Aaron Champlin. It's not like the 1 to 2% kind of ownership. It's over 5% is what we're looking at elsewhere. But yeah, it's if I'm playing a backup running back on the Steelers, for me it would be Aaron Champlin, because we saw him out there last week. All right, outside of the Steelers, Rico Dowdle, it's tough, man. They keep on talking about it. Before their last game. They came out and said, and I'm blanking now on, I can picture the head coach and now I'm forgetting his name, said we need to run the ball more. We really need to start running, using these running backs more, multiple times throughout the week. Prior to the last game, talked about how much they need to start running the ball. And then they really didn't last week. So I don't know how much I want to believe him that they're actually going to try to run the ball more this week. With that said, Rico Dowdle is, has taken on a little bit more of a role as the season has gone on. Still not like an awesome role. He hasn't been Mike McCarthy, the name I'm trying to say. Has not been like fully taking over the backfield like many of us are hoping for. I mean, believe me, I am hoping for Rico Dowdle to take over that backfield. So far, we have not really seen it. Again, we can pull up last week. Dowdle, 47% snap share, 11 carries. And if you look at all the running backs here, I mean, Zeke had 5, Lupke had 2. So we had 11 of the 18 running back carries. Not exactly a huge workload there. Ran 9 routes, 32% route participation, and 1 target last week. Just not really great usage. The week prior, 8 carries, ran 16 routes, still 29% route participation. Did see 5 targets in that game and the game prior. So it seemed kind of promising, like, okay, 5 targets, that's pretty huge for a running back. Had that back-to-back weeks, but then last week down to just 1 target. I don't know. It's a it's a tough spot. It's a tough matchup with the Steelers. And I guess I can pull up schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to the running back position. Steelers down here 10th or so, worst matchup, maybe 11th. Not a great matchup for Rico Dowdle. Better, I mean, as we showed earlier, better matchup for the Pittsburgh running backs. I think he's playable. It really comes down to ownership. Not my favorite play, just because it's a tough matchup and is expensive, and he doesn't have like a huge role. But if the ownership's low enough, 25.5% for a starting, at least nominal starting running back, I think it's fine, maybe even high, if anything. Like, I think I'd prefer Ferguson cheaper in a vacuum. Ferguson also getting more ownership. Actually, interesting. So RotoGrinder says Rico Dowdle projected for more fantasy points than Jake Ferguson. But Dowdle more expensive, getting a little bit less ownership. I don't have a huge take on 25.5. I think that's pretty reasonable. Seems about right. In the captain spot, Dowdle at 4% again. I don't know. I don't have a huge take here. I wish I had more of a take than I did. If we didn't see, I mean, the usage has been consistently bad. I don't know. It's we haven't really seen that breakout game where he gets 25 touches. And I keep on thinking it might be coming. I think Zeke is pretty dust. Feels like Dowdle should have more opportunities, but we haven't seen it yet. And now we get a really tough matchup with the Steelers. These ownership numbers, I mean, sub 30% total ownership. I'd say I'm slightly bullish on it. I think I'm probably going to be a little bit above weight to the field on Rico Dowdle. But yeah, not super excited about it. It's certainly like my expectation is 10 carries for 30 yards and 1 reception for 5 yards. You know, that's like the baseline for Rico Dowdle. Hoping for more, obviously, hoping that he just breaks one. I think he looks playable out there. Looks like an NFL running back, not like a star, but like a decent running back. Yeah, I think, but sub 30% seems okay to me. I think that's a number that I could probably match, maybe get a little bit on top of the field on Rico Dowdle. Not super excited about it. Zeke, I think, is a full fade for me. Makes me nervous. Certainly they could always use Zeke at the goal line, would not be shocking at all. The role hasn't been that good. I mean, last week, Zeke had played a total of 9 snaps, 5 carries, 1 target. It always feels like Zeke is getting more usage than he is, but yeah, not that great of a role. Last week, the week prior, 3 carries, 2 targets. Kind of feels like Zeke is going to, and he's not a player who's going to get a 50-yard touchdown. Like, Zeke probably needs to score a touchdown to pay off his salary, $4,400. Might need 2 touchdowns to pay off that salary. So to me, Zeke is largely a stay. I mean, probably entirely. I think I'm playing 30 lineups tonight. I think I'm just going to full fade Zeke. And if he scores 2 touchdowns, it's going to kill me. I'm not going to love that. But I am going to accept it. I'm going to accept that risk, because I don't think it's unlikely that Zeke is going to get those opportunities. I don't think we see any reason that Zeke should be the goal line back with Lupke there. Should be Lupke. You never know. Jerry Jones, is he getting in their ear? Are they going to play Zeke more than they should? Possibly. But to me, if that's just a kind of clear stand to me of, yeah, he just doesn't get enough usage. So I'm going to stay away from it. It makes me a little bit nervous. It's a stand I'm taking. These, Zeke on a showdown slate, 2 touchdowns, is it guaranteed? I don't know, but probably just given the usage, given the price tag, I think he's priced too high because of his name, getting too much ownership because of his name, and just has not really had much of a role at all this year. I guess has some that, has the same kind of contingent upside that a running back 2 usually does. Could come in, get more work if Dowdle is out, but I think he's getting too much ownership just because of the name. That's a spot that I want to fade. So to me, Zeke is going to be a fade. Where is he in? Is he getting? It looks like he's not getting any captain ownership. 1% captain ownership. Flex ownership, we have Zeke at 13%. Yeah, that's a bit too much for a player that doesn't look that good, doesn't have much of a role. So I'm staying away from Zeke. Any other? Lupke is the other one. He's just 1,000. Kind of like the role for Lupke. I mean, again, looking at the Belka report last week, 2 targets on 46.4% route participation. Actually had a couple carries last week. The week prior, 25.5% route participation, 3 targets. So he's had some opportunities basically every game recently. The week prior to that, actually week 2 had not much of an opportunity, 0 targets, 9% route participation, but weeks 3 and 4, the opportunity is kind of going up there for Lupke. I think it's Lipke. I think I'm saying that wrong. Lipke, Hunter Lipke. Some positive coach speak for Lipke on September 30th. This is Coach Speak Index. If you want access to this, Coach Speak Index Discord, check it out. But Brian Schottenheimer, offensive coordinator, says we have a ton of confidence in Hunter Lipke. We've put some of the third down stuff in there with him, which to me would indicate like maybe he could be the goal line back. If they're using him on third down stuff, would make sense. He's a big fullback, would make sense to use at the goal line. We haven't really seen it yet. We haven't seen it. I don't think he has a single inside the 5 carry yet this year, but it would make sense for them to do that. Seems like they're kind of moving more and more in that direction. Schottenheimer said, this guy is just a confident football player. He can do so many cool things, like what you saw from him in college. He played halfback, tight end, fullback, special teams. Hunter has made a ton of plays. Hunter's a guy that we just see continue to ascend. We don't feel that there's really a lot that he can't do, and we're still scratching the surface of how he's going to help us win a lot of games. So to me, this is, a situation where the role is probably going to continue to expand for Hunter Lipke. So if I'm making a bet on a backup Cowboys running back, it's Lipke. I like the role better. I mean, it's a similar role, but he's $1,000 and feels like probably moving in the right direction, whereas Zeke is probably moving in the wrong direction. So if I'm making a bet on a backup Dallas running back, it's going to be Lipke. And I actually like the play. I think 1,000 is a nice price tag there for Lipke. Going to get a little bit of ownership, I think. In the flex, we have him. Oh, hang on, let me refresh here. I think he's getting a little bit of ownership. Although I kind of wonder if they have. Yeah, I think there's an error in the RG system. I should probably alert somebody. Let me look elsewhere for ownership on Lipke, because he's definitely not going to be 0% owned. Sub 10% first place I look. Sub 10%. We're looking in the like 5 to 8% range for Hunter Lipke. I like that. I think that's a solid number for Lipke. I think he has standalone value. We've seen him targeted a handful of times over the past few weeks. The coach speak has been great. I think he could be the goal line back. So yeah, I like Lipke. I don't know that the role is going to be much better than like 3 targets, but I think it could be. I think there's the possibility there, and even 3 targets at 1,000, as long as he catches a couple of those passes, is going to look pretty good. So Lipke, I do have interest in, even in the tough matchup with the Steelers. Also like that his, the work that he is getting so far has been through the air, and you can just rack up those PPR points. Love to see that. So some interest in Lipke. I think that does it for running backs. So now we can talk about the wide receivers. CeeDee Lamb, George Pickens, standouts. Again, we have Cooks is out for this game. So you see some of these Dallas receivers kind of step up and roll with no Brandon Cooks there. I'm going to pull up schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed again. We'll start with the Dallas side. So it is a below average matchup here. Not like bottom of the league so far this year, but below average in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to wide receivers on average. You'd expect like 3.2 fewer fantasy overall to the position. So it being a middling matchup here, not something that really scares me away. Don't love the matchup with the Steelers, but let's take a look at since we're at wide receiver, we can take a look at the wide receiver cornerback matchups report. All right, so the matchups have Jalen Tolbert. I mean, this is what you'd expect. Jalen Tolbert, slight negative matchup. CeeDee Lamb, slight negative matchup. No huge, and Brandon Cooks is the other one that's in there, obviously not playing today. So bad matchups across the board for the Cowboys. Nothing stands out there. That's kind of what you expect. It's just the Steelers. The Steelers are tough in general. Not a great spot for the Cowboys receivers. I still think it's, they're too good to just fully ignore. I'm going to have a good amount of CeeDee Lamb. Let's take a look at the ownership here. In the flex, we have CeeDee Lamb at 45% ownership. That seems fine. He is expensive, 1,000 more expensive than Dak, 2,000 more expensive than anybody else on the slate, which makes it a little bit tougher to get there at captain. But coming in at just 14% projected ownership at the captain spot, kind of like that. I think we have some nice values on the slate. So playing, I don't want to call him a sure thing, but like volume wise kind of thing in CeeDee Lamb. I like him quite a bit at the captain spot. I think I would prefer to play CD at captain if I were just like hand building one lineup. I'd be more inclined to play CD at captain than Justin Fields, because of the reduced ownership. Yeah, and I think we have enough value. So he is the most expensive, 3,000 more expensive at captain than Justin Fields, but I think we have enough value on the slate to make it with CeeDee Lamb. So I imagine I come in higher than 14% ownership on CeeDee Lamb. And the flex ownership is, to me, fine. I'm probably going to be right with the field there. Maybe I move some flex ownership over to instead. Not going to be like in 80% of my lineups, but probably a little bit higher than the field overall on CeeDee Lamb, and certainly more in the captain spot. Outside of CeeDee Lamb, so again, no Brandon Cooks. So you see bigger roles for Jalen Tolbert, Jalen Brooks, maybe Kevontae Turpin, potentially Ryan Flournoy. Again, I think he's a wide receiver 5. So somebody asked about him earlier. I'm not going out of my way to play Ryan Flournoy. I'm probably not going to get there in my 30 lineups tonight. If I had 150, I might sprinkle it in a little bit. We did get some coach speak. Actually, let me read the Flournoy coach speak. Mike McCarthy said 3 days ago, Ryan Flournoy plays football the right way. He's tough, he's physical, he's competitive. We've talked every week about trying to find a way to get him up because of his play style. I've been very, very impressed with the young man. So he is up now for this game with the Brandon Cooks out, but I don't know that I expect him to actually play. I think he's still the wide receiver 5. He would be kind of fun to see him out there. I don't think that I'm going to get there with Ryan Flournoy, but in a 150 set, I think he's certainly playable. Yeah, Bink King, that was a great call. Bigsby crushed today. Let's see. All right. What else? What else do we have here? So we'll start with let's take a look at the usage from last week. And again, we have Brandon Cooks out, so roles are changing here. CeeDee Lamb, we talked about CeeDee Lamb. Everybody knows CeeDee Lamb is the bell cow here for the Cowboys. Okay, the main. Let's take a look at just last week. Actually, I think probably is just to see where things are trending. Jalen Tolbert last week, 7.6% route participation, 3 targets. Everything pretty bullish for Jalen Tolbert right now. The price tag is pretty high, but probably warranted with no Cooks out there. Again, so we had Cooks in there for 89% route participation, 4 targets last week. So somebody's coming in to replace those. I think it's going to be some combination of, Jalen Tolbert probably just steps up from the wide receiver 3 role into the wide receiver 2 role. Jalen Brooks, I think, probably then takes on that wide receiver 3 role, steps in to that role that Jalen Tolbert kind of vacates. And then Kevontae Turpin, I don't know, he's more of a special teams guy. I don't know how much of a role Kevontae Turpin is going to have. We can take a look at the projections. Just looking at, so Brandon Cooks, 72% out wide. Jalen Brooks, 100% out wide. That's just last week. Jalen Tolbert, no like dedicated slot receiver. They got Jake Ferguson running the slot. I don't know. They don't have anybody running like 80% in the slot. They kind of all run all over the place. But my understanding of this wide receiver room is Jalen Tolbert probably just steps into that wide receiver 3 role. I would expect it to be Jalen Brooks stepping into a bigger role before Kevontae Turpin would be my assumption here. It's a little bit, Turpin, I think he's in play. I think Turpin probably does get some more run here. And we can take a look at the projections. So the Fantasy Points projections has it Tolbert, as we expect, stepping into that wide receiver 2 role. Jalen Brooks stepping into that wide receiver 3 role. KaVontae Turpin maybe gets a little bit more run, not used all that much. I mean, we see KaVontae Turpin last week, just 2 routes run, 0 targets on 2 routes run. Like he's never been somebody that they use much in the receiver role. I guess in week 3, 9 routes run, actually did see 3 targets. So, maybe he plays a little bit more of a role. Saw 3 targets in week 2 as well. Not nothing. So that's with Brandon Cooks there. So maybe he could step into a bigger role. Maybe we're giving too much of this to Jalen Brooks. But Jalen Brooks has been pretty consistently ahead of him. Wait, where is Jalen Brooks here? Week 4, we had just 11% to Brooks, 7% to Turpin. I don't know. I think we're making the assumption that it's Jalen Brooks playing ahead of Turpin. I think that is genuinely reasonable. But I'll read you the quote from Mike McCarthy on KaVontae Turpin from a couple days ago. Said, KaVontae Turpin has grown tremendously as a receiver. I love what he brings to the table. He's super detailed. He can play all 4 spots. He knows the offense inside and out. I'm just so proud of him. His athletic ability jumps off the charts. Very easy to read for a quarterback. I think he's grown a ton in the last year. So pretty bullish quotes there from Mike McDaniel. Where does Roto-Grinders have this breakdown here? Because those do kind of sway me a little bit to think maybe he has a bigger role than we're anticipating. Roto-Grinders has it as, let's see, Turpin projected for 5, Brooks projected. So Roto-Grinders has Turpin projected a little bit better. It's a tough situation to read, but I don't know. I think the fact that we're getting positive quotes on Turpin at low ownership, I'm sort of selling myself a little bit on Turpin. The more we're looking at it, projected for 13.5% ownership here. Let me look elsewhere for Turpin's ownership if it's kind of consistent around the industry. Yeah, looks like that is Turpin getting more ownership around the industry than Jalen Brooks. Jalen Brooks projecting, hang on one second. Yeah, it's pretty close. It's pretty close around the industry. Other places seem to have Turpin projected a little bit better than Jalen Brooks and getting more ownership than Jalen Brooks. Looks like I think Fantasy Points had it as the opposite, but I think that's probably right. It's a tough read here. Ultimately, I think both are pretty good plays. Like I think Jalen Brooks at 2,400, KaVontae Turpin at 3,000. Both of them are going to have some role here. Both of them coming in between 10 and 15% ownership. Pretty positive coach speak from Mike McDaniel on KaVontae Turpin. I think I might actually lean that way a little bit more on Turpin more than Jalen Brooks. Don't feel super confident in it. I wish I could give you a more definitive answer on these Cowboys receivers, but it's pretty mixed around the industry. The projections are pretty close. Kind of seems like everybody's splitting the difference between the two. I think ultimately I prefer Turpin. He's also more expensive. I think slightly into Turpin for me, but I think both are pretty solid plays. I would probably end up 20% plus of each potentially. I think both are good enough plays that I'm probably going to lean in a little bit because they are low enough owned. I'd be happier if I could just settle on one as being the better play entirely. But I think it's going to be Turpin, the bigger priority for me. Maybe get to 20% Turpin and 18% Jalen Brooks. Wish I could give you better than that, but that's I don't know. It's a little bit of a tough situation to read, as you can kind of see with what we're seeing around the industry for these projections. Anybody else? And Tolbert, I think, is a pretty solid play. I mean, he's 5,600, so he actually needs to do something with that price tag. But 5,600 as the wide receiver too, I kind of feel like it's similar to if we just have Brandon Cooks here at 5,600, except I think Tolbert might be actually better than Brooks at this point. So I kind of like that. And the ownership on, let's see, the ownership on Tolbert, 25% in the flex. 3.5% in the captain. I kind of like that. I kind of like that 3.5% captain number. I think I'd probably be above that on Tolbert. Just because it's is it a second year, third year? I think just a second year. I think we don't really know how good he can be yet with a full workload. So I think Tolbert steps into a big enough workload at a small enough price tag that I'm kind of into it. I think I'm probably going to be above weight in the captain spot, similar to about quarter of my lineups will have him in the flex, but I like it. Okay. So I guess in conclusion, CeeDee Lamb, we know what CeeDee Lamb is. He's a great play. I like him in the captain spot. Going to be overweight to CeeDee Lamb in the captain spot, probably close to the field in the flex. Jalen Tolbert, similarly, I think I'm going to be over in the captain spot, close to the field in the flex. Jalen Brooks, Kevontae Turpin. I prefer Turpin. I think I'd be more inclined to have like 20% Turpin, maybe a little bit under 20% Jalen Brooks. But in both cases, I think I'm going to be above weight to the field. I think the field's going to come in 10 to 15% range. I'm going to be slightly above that for Jalen Brooks, probably take a little bit of a bigger stand, try to get 20 to 25% of Kevontae Turpin. I think somebody should have opportunities here. Again, tough matchup. Who knows if they score, but hopefully we get some PPR scamming at least from the Cowboys receivers. Then we have Pittsburgh and George Pickens, and we can look at schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed by the Cowboys. Looks like it is a slightly above average matchup. Now, again, we have Micah Parsons out. So maybe even a slightly better matchup than that. I don't think it's like an amazing matchup. They still have some talent on the team, but maybe an above average matchup. And then looking at the actual matrix of who is playing where, we've got a slightly below average matchup for George Pickens with Trevon Diggs, very slightly above average for Van Jefferson, Calvin Austin, a little bit of a bad matchup there. Not worried too much about these individual matchups. None of them are like the extremes where it starts to really affect the way I want to play them. Like I'm not targeting one versus the other based on these matchups. They're all close enough to me. But I think, again, pretty interesting plays at pretty low ownership. So let's go. Captain spot, we have George Pickens coming in at 9% ownership. I like it. I think it's a matchup that George Pickens could win. I'd be more inclined to go to George Pickens at 9% than Justin Fields at 21%. Just hope that Justin Fields is, when he's scoring fantasy points, he's doing it through the air. George Pickens is outscoring him. So I do like 9% ownership going to George Pickens in the captain spot. In the flex, we have Pickens at 35% ownership. Yeah, that seems reasonable. Not taking any huge stand on George Pickens. All right, who am I fading here? So I'm fully fading Zeke because I'm finding myself all these numbers look okay, and then I like them better in the captain spot. I guess I'm slightly fading Justin Fields in the captain spot to get to more of other plays. This number seems fine to me on George Pickens. Probably not taking a huge stand there. And part of the reason I'm looking for somebody to fade is because I really do like the other Pittsburgh receivers. I think those are some of my favorite plays. We just went through kind of the backup secondary, tertiary options for the Cowboys, and I liked those, but I think I like the Pittsburgh receivers almost like just as much, because we've got Van Jefferson here at 13% ownership, and then Calvin Austin coming in sub 10% ownership. So I do think those are, as I mentioned, that we have a lot of pretty good value plays on this slate, which allows us to get up to like CeeDee Lamb in the captain spot. And I like them all. And we can, pretty low ownership. Let's take a look at the numbers from last week. So last week, in terms of route participation, we had obviously George Pickens up here at 88%, but then we had Van Jefferson at 79%, saw a few targets in that game. And then we have Calvin Austin, 55% route participation, saw just one target in that game. None of them are going to be probably targeted like outside of Pickens. Obviously, nobody's getting like double-digit targets. We just don't like looking at these targets like for the entire year. We have George Pickens has been targeted 11 times once, 7, 7. Outside of George Pickens, it's Freiermuth, 6, 5. Calvin Austin has been targeted 5 times in one game this year. Van Jefferson 3 times. Like, none of these are going to be PPR scam plays, but at low ownership, I think I like the odds of just having one play that can break things open. Let's take a look at hang on. For the year, Van Jefferson's ADOT just 8.4. That's lower than I would have anticipated with Van Jefferson. But for the year, we have Van Jefferson 59% route share. Again, that was better last week for Van Jefferson. Calvin Austin's been pretty steady in this kind of low 50s range in terms of route participation. Just 8 targets on the year for Van Jefferson, 10 for Calvin Austin. I think they're pretty solid plays at low ownership in this matchup where the Steelers have the better matchup. So I do have some interest in these backup secondary tertiary receivers for the Steelers also. Probably still going to be something like 15%, not going to be going like 40% on any of these guys. I think Van Jefferson makes sense to me as just a value play. I think people have brought up FanDuel. I like Van Jefferson on FanDuel getting like 0 ownership. Calvin Austin sort of interested me kind of to a lesser extent than Van Jefferson just because of, you look at the ownership, 13% going to Van Jefferson at 3.2K. Calvin Austin more expensive, getting just a little bit less ownership. I feel like Van Jefferson just a little bit more likely, has a better role, a little bit more likely to break one off and be put up a score that you need at 3.2K. So maybe I go up to 15-20% Van Jefferson, get up to 15% of Calvin Austin and call it a day. Like, I'm not going out of my way to, I'm getting a little bit above weight to all of these secondary, tertiary receivers at the expense of, playing them instead of Zeke Elliott. So that's part of the Zeke Elliott, that he getting 13% ownership, just kind of spread that out to these secondary, tertiary receivers instead. And let's see if we're ranking all of the receivers, not including CeeDee Lamb, George Pickens, or Jalen Tolbert. I think Jalen Tolbert also just head above everybody else here. I think if you rank the other receivers here, it would probably be Kevontae Turpin 1, Van Jefferson 2, Calvin Austin 3, Jalen Brooks 4. I don't think I'm getting to any Scotty Miller. But again, I think I'm going to be above weight to all 4 of Jalen Brooks, Calvin Austin, Van Jefferson, Kevontae Turpin. My favorite, again, probably is Kevontae Turpin, Van Jefferson. Looks like it's just in this order. So Kevontae Turpin, Van Jefferson, Calvin Austin, Jalen Brooks, probably my preferred order for those 4, but it's pretty thin there. Like they're all, if they catch a long ball, if they catch a touchdown, they're going to pay off the price tag. I think that's roughly the likelihood of having that long ball to pay off, or just getting a few targets and paying off their price tag. I think it goes in this order from the bottom: Turpin, Jefferson, Austin, Brooks. I don't feel super strongly about that. If you have somebody you like a lot better, I'd be open to hearing otherwise, that I'm wrong about this. But that's kind of my read on it. Sean says, this game going to be ugly. Yeah, I kind of feel like this game is going to be ugly. It's a tough one to read. Like when I was looking at it, I was like, man, this is not like my favorite 2 teams. Like it's tough to get a read on these teams because they're just so like spread out outside of like the top, obviously, with the Cowboys, but like beyond Ferguson and CeeDee Lamb, it's like, okay, Tolbert is the next man up, and then what else? And the running back's kind of a mess. It's a gross game. It's a gross game for sure. I'm with you on that. All right, enough on wide receivers. Oh, and then Ryan Florno was brought up. Yeah, you can see not even projected here. Does Roto-Grinders have a projection? If you play Ryan Florno, it's basically like a believing the coach speak that they really want to get him involved. Now they have him up, they're going to play him. I think I'm not going to get there, but you could. Yeah, Hunter Lipke is a thing. I like Hunter Lipke. Okay, let's see. Appreciate you, Sean. Says you're getting free info. Yeah, would appreciate that if you want to like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel as I'm trying to grow it. Very much appreciated. Okay. Moving on to tight ends. Jake Ferguson at the top. Pretty good spot for tight ends in general. I'm realizing the more I do this, I need to find more fades because I like these tight ends quite a bit. Great spot for Jake Ferguson based on schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed. Pittsburgh, this is one of the few spots that you can exploit on Pittsburgh. Sixth in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to the tight end position. Ferguson going to get I think he actually leads, I think if I remember correctly, leads the Cowboys in target share. He has missed a game, so has fewer targets than CeeDee Lamb, but I think target share wise actually has a better target share than CeeDee Lamb. Gets the better matchup here. And then on the other side of it, you have Freiermuth. Where's Dallas here? Dallas down toward the bottom. So not a great matchup for Freiermuth. Well, let's start with the Dallas side of things. Think it's just Jake Ferguson for me on the Dallas side. Let me see. What did Shoemaker do last week? Maybe I'm writing him off too quickly. He didn't stand out to me as of all these value plays I liked. I don't think Shoemaker is one that stood out to me. Yeah. 5 routes last week, 0 targets. The week before, 14 routes and saw 2 targets. Was that Ferguson? No, Ferguson was in for that one. So he has the kind of typical backup tight end role. Scores a touchdown, you want him. If he doesn't score a touchdown, you won't want him. That's kind of the typical backup tight end. I think that's exactly what Schoonmaker is. I'm probably not going to play him in 30 lineups. I'm going to play all those wide receivers that are a little bit more interesting. I think he's playable. I think I would have some in a 150 set, but we're in Schoonmaker coming in at 3% flex ownership. That's actually pretty interesting. I think you could certainly get to Schoonmaker, but you're just kind of relying on that touchdown, one-off, payoff, $1,600 price tag. I think in a 150 set, I'd probably shoot for like 5% ownership on Schoonmaker in 30 lineups. I don't think he's going to make my player pool, but marginally playable. And then you have Jake Ferguson, 7,600 coming in at 32% ownership. I like it. I think Jake Ferguson, that was one of my hot takes on today. I think both tight ends get targeted quite a bit in this game. We saw it's the best matchup against Pittsburgh is for the tight ends. Jake Ferguson already again leads the team in target share on the season, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah, just barely 20.9% to CeeDee Lamb's 20.4% on the season. Kind of a target hog anyway. Gets a matchup where you'd expect him to be targeted quite a bit. He's 7,600. He's getting some ownership, but I like Ferguson. I think the ownership is reasonable at 32%, and then the captain ownership there, Ferguson at 7%. I like that number too. I don't think I'm going to be like above that, but I think I'll probably force at least 5% captain ownership to Ferguson. Like I want to have a couple shots on Ferguson captain lineups because I think he will be targeted quite a bit. This could be a really low scoring game, so just having like 5 receptions for 60 yards and a touchdown could be enough for Ferguson to be the optimal captain. So I like it. I think this is reasonable ownership. A little bit under 40% total ownership on Ferguson feels fine to me. Not really taking any huge stand there, but I think he's a pretty solid play. Again, probably not going to Schoonmaker. And then Freiermuth, you can see 9.6 projection at 6,600. He's just $1,000 cheaper than Ferguson. Projects quite a bit worse, but it's kind of interesting looking at the game log for Freiermuth. So he goes from week 1, 63% route participation, 4 targets. Week 2, 73% route participation, 4 targets. Week 3 up to 83%. So his best route participation and 5 targets. I mean, these are pretty small incremental changes. Week 4 down to, 78.6. So still better than weeks 1 and 2. Pretty comparable to week 3 in 6 targets. So they have used him a little bit more in recent weeks than they had earlier in the season. The raw route numbers up from 1919 to 2933, just running more passing plays in general. I think Freiermuth is pretty interesting. We could continue to see this trend where he's around 80% rate participation, second on the team in targets. Kind of my expectation. I think he's a pretty talented tight end. We've been kind of waiting for the breakout. So I think Freiermuth makes a lot of sense here. But let's take a look at the ownership. In the captain spot, we have Freiermuth at 3% projected ownership. Yeah, I'm not taking any major stance there. I'd rather play Ferguson. I think it's Ferguson just the better tight end in general. Looks like he's about double the ownership. Probably should be. And then in the flex, we have Freiermuth at 22%. So I really like this number. I think I'm going to be way above 22% on Freiermuth. I think I'd rather be more like 40%. Again, probably not playing him much, maybe at all in the captain spot, but I think 22%, I really like that number for Freiermuth in the flex. I think I'll probably have at least 35, 40% Freiermuth. I think the price tag is right. The role is really good. Again, the second best receiving role on the Steelers behind George Pickens, and just not getting a ton of ownership in a matchup. Again, no Micah Parsons, so better matchup than maybe it looks on paper for the Steelers for Pat Freiermuth. So I do like Freiermuth here quite a bit. And then Darnell Washington, another one of those, backup tight end. I'd rather play Darnell Washington than Luke Schoonmaker if I am playing a backup tight end. Again, looking at, let's look at Darnell Washington's role. Best that it has been all season last week, or I should. There we go. Okay. Throughout the year. So week 1, 23.3% route participation, week 2, 11%, week 3, 17%, up to 36% in week 4. So we saw the route participation double week over week from week 3 to week 4. Saw a couple targets last week as well. All of this seems pretty promising to me for Darnell Washington. We've seen him 3 first read targets on the year, does have 1 end zone target on the year, and he's the only one of all the Steelers who have been targeted in the end zone. He's the only one who has actually converted on an end zone target. So I think he's 6'7", just a big bodied tight end that you would hope would be more involved in the red zone area. We've kind of, again, just 1 target, so don't want to read too much into that, but promising that he converted it. Love to see that the route participation got better in week 4 than it had been previously. So I do like Darnell Washington. I like him better than Luke Schoonmaker. Again, we saw the role expand just a little bit last week, kind of promising for a second year tight end, seeing that role move up a little bit. So I do like some Darnell Washington, and also not projected for a ton of ownership. In the flex, we have Darnell Washington at 9% projected ownership. That seems pretty good to me. I think a step below most of those receivers, probably for me. More like a dart throw play. Probably not playing him at captain. Let's see. So he's 2,600, getting around 10% ownership. Yeah, I think I'd rather go to Kevontae Turpin, probably Van Jefferson. Yeah, I think I probably rank him below all of these receivers. I'm still sort of doubting myself on like why I have Brooks last year. Maybe I like Brooks better than. Maybe I like both of the Cowboys guys better than the Steelers guys, just because they are stepping into a role on an offense that's probably a little bit more likely to use them. So I'm going to revise my previous rankings. I think I'm going to go Turpin first, Brooks second, and then Jefferson, Austin, and then finally Darnell Washington, and then Luke Schoonmaker last of that group. I think the Cowboys receivers, I think I ranked them lower. I ranked Brooks lower because it is a tougher matchup with Pittsburgh, but I think there's like more upside to have a role where they actually get targeted 6 or 7 times. So I'm changing my mind a little bit on the rankings there. I think I actually prefer the Cowboys receivers to those Steelers receivers. Thinking through it a little bit more. Okay. I think that's it on tight ends also. Oh, and I guess I need to be moving this sidebar as I go. I'm behind again. Receivers, tight ends, defensive kickers going to be pretty chalky, as they probably should be. Again, this should be a low scoring game. We know Justin Fields takes a lot of sacks. Let's take a look at the flex ownership. We've got Chris Boswell at 22%, Steelers defense 20%, Brandon Aubrey 19%, Cowboys defense 18%. I think if I were going to lean into one relative to ownership, it would be the Cowboys defense. They're 4,800. Again, Justin Fields historically just takes a lot of sacks. I think this Cowboys defense still like should be an above average defense. They haven't really been so far this year, but the talent on the team, they're missing Micah Parsons, which obviously hurts. But with Justin Fields, having a tendency to take sacks, I think I like the Cowboys defense. Also, some nice leverage on the entire field wanting to play a lot of Justin Fields. I think going to the Cowboys defense is just really nice leverage there. Not many people are going to have both Justin Fields with the Cowboys defense. So if I have a favorite, I think I'm leaning towards Cowboys defense at this point. It's close between somebody had asked earlier, and I said Brandon Aubrey. I don't feel that strongly about it, but the more I think about it, a little bit cheaper on DraftKings, $1,000 cheaper than Brandon Aubrey, has the benefit of playing against Justin Fields, who takes sacks. So I guess if I'm taking a stand on defense or kicker, probably going to be the Cowboys defense. And Steelers are just 4K. They are the better defense, and they're 4,000. But I think all four of these, to be clear, I think are pretty strong plays. Nobody getting crazy high ownership. We've seen kickers this year just absolutely dominate every single showdown slate. Yeah, I think I'd probably Cowboys number one for me, Cowboys defense, but I think all are pretty reasonable plays tonight. Okay, let's move on. I'll take any questions. I know some people wanted to talk about. Jared says wind tonight is 10 miles per hour plus. 10 is not quite at the level where I'm carrying yet. If it gets up to like 20, then I'll start worrying more about the winds. Definitely can affect things if we get enough, but I don't think we're 10 miles per hour. Not quite enough for me to care about the weather. All right. Anybody have questions? Let's take a look at FanDuel real quick, because I know some people had asked for it. And then I'll play around with building some lineups, take any questions. All right, so FanDuel MVP. Chalk is Justin Fields. Seems reasonable. There's no adjustment on FanDuel for the salary, so I think 28% seems okay. I'd rather go to CeeDee Lamb over Najee Harris. I like the ownership, 12%, 12.5% projected ownership on CeeDee Lamb. Looks really nice to me. I think that's a spot where I would get certainly above weight to the field. Dak, 14.5% seems fine to me also. Ferguson, 4%. I actually think on FanDuel, going to the defenses hoping for a low-scoring game can make some sense. So defense in the MVP spot is an option for sure on FanDuel. But overall, I think CeeDee Lamb probably my favorite. Leaning more on the Dallas side just because we have Justin Fields, Najee Harris as the chalk. So I'd rather just kind of be a little bit contrarian and go to the slightly lower owned CeeDee Lamb, Dak Prescott there. In the flex, who do we have that's contrarian? Ferguson, 24% feels pretty good. Tolbert, 19% feels okay. He's 10,000. So not super cheap, but that kind of like that number. Might want to be above that. Again, kickers and defenses look good on FanDuel. Again, I'm probably fully fading Zeke. I like Freiermuth at 17%. Same price as Zeke, getting just slightly more ownership. I like Freiermuth's role way better than Zeke's. So I would lean into Freiermuth there. Turpin, 10% projected ownership. I like that at 7,000. That's a pretty nice number there for Turpin. Here, actually, Jalen Brooks, if you want to play Jalen Brooks somewhere, only 5,500 on FanDuel, getting 8.5% ownership. Really like that number for Jalen Brooks. So I would lean into that. Van Jefferson, 6,500, 10% ownership. looks really good. Kelvin Austin, all those same like backup secondary, tertiary receivers look pretty good on FanDuel. Darnell Washington coming in at 6-7% ownership. So a lot of the same names on FanDuel. I'd probably lean into the pass catchers. Shamklin, min priced 5,000 is pretty interesting. 6% ownership. I would just mix in, just like have one of those guys in your lineup, and I think you're looking pretty good on FanDuel. Don't have. I wish I could. None of them like really stand that far out to me above the field. Yeah, look, there's some error here on Lookie's ownership. Probably largely the same order. Maybe actually because they're cheaper. Maybe on FanDuel, I'd be more inclined to go to Jalen Brooks. Throw Shamklin in there. Pretty interesting. I think Shamklin has that major contingent upside. Not many people are going to go there. 6% projected ownership at 5,000. Go there and leave a little salary on the table. I think that would be very, very contrarian. In again, only a large field GPP. I guess that's my gotta shout that out. I'm talking about large field GPPs here. Probably don't need to play Shamklin in a small field GPP. Okay, let's see. It's all about plays on ownership. Make your plays, stick with your gut, and let it roll. Yeah. Matt Butler says former All-Pro and 4 times Pro Bowl defensive tackle DeMarcus Lawrence is also out for Dallas, in addition to Micah Parsons. Yep. So it is a better matchup for the Steelers. I just think the Steelers they're never a lock to beat any defense, and I still don't think the Cowboys are on the level of like the Rams or some of those, or the Commanders, some of those terrible defense out there. I still think they're going to be a pretty average defense, even missing some pieces. So I'm playing my way of playing contrarian. I think is going to be largely leaning into Dallas as the field leans into Pittsburgh. The game is in Pittsburgh, so kind of tough from that perspective. But I think the field is really going to lean into Pittsburgh. It's kind of what ownership numbers indicate. I think Dallas is just a better offense in general. So I think I'll just lean into the better offense and hope for the best. Obviously, I'm trying to win large field GPPs, so it's not necessarily the likeliest outcome, but I think Dallas is certainly capable of just putting up a much better showing than Pittsburgh, just looking like the more competent offense out there. So I'm generally leaning more into the Dallas side, even with all the injuries to Dallas's defense. All right, let's build a couple lineups here on DraftKings. All right, where are we? Is this tonight? Yeah. Oh shit, we're only 13 minutes away. All right, I'll do this quick because I need to go actually make my lineups. So I've said it. I think CeeDee Lamb, my favorite captain. And again, I'll throw Dak in there, kind of lean into the Dallas side of things. Maybe now just maybe one more pass catcher from Dallas. Throw Turpin in there. So now we have 6,100 left per player. Could go to Lipke. He's not only a pass catcher. That's how he's been used, but I could see him take on a bigger role. Maybe throw Darnell Washington in here. Where's he? 2,600. All right, so now we have 7,950 left per player. Said I like the Cowboys defense. So let's lean into that. And then we have 1,100 left. Now I could throw in Fields or Pickens. Leaves 1,300 on the table. I like this. I think this is the kind of lineup that's going to be a little bit contrarian, leaning more into the Dallas side of things. But you love, CeeDee Lamb at captain. Is anybody surprised at all if CeeDee Lamb is the optimal captain? You've got the correlation there with Dak Prescott. You've got just Kevontae Turpin there. Darnell Washington, certainly capable of scoring a touchdown and paying off this $2,600 price tag. Justin Fields can do it on the ground, throws the one touchdown to Darnell Washington. They're the only Steelers you want. And then the Cowboys defense can put up a big score, sacking Justin Fields, maybe one turnover for a touchdown, that kind of thing. So I think this looks like a pretty good large field lineup. Fields has looked pretty good for sure, and the Steelers have been doing pretty well. It's not a knock on Fields. I just think that probably Dallas still has the more capable offense. Jared says, I think ground is the way to go. Both kickers are in top 5 kickers in terms of like scoring this year. Yeah, if you go to the ground game, I mean, I'm probably going to be light on Najee Harris. I still think you could do Najee Harris in the captain spot. I don't think that's like a bad way to go. Go Najee Harris. I mean, you could do the old double kicker from the Steelers. Just maybe they lean into the ground. I mean, and then Justin Fields also. They just don't throw a ton. Justin Fields is doing it on the ground. The running backs doing it on the ground. This feels like it's sort of negative correlation to an extent, but I'd probably be okay with it. Just hope that the Steelers are able to run quite a bit. Now, if you want to go the Dallas side, if we're leaning into the run, I don't love Dowdle, but maybe he would make. Maybe this is where you want to go to. So you need these guys scoring. So probably away from the kickers here. More inclined to go with defenses. So maybe lean into Steelers defense, CeeDee Lamb PPR scam, Jake Ferguson PPR scam. There you go. There's a sort of interesting lineup. Doesn't make a ton of sense. You've got Justin Fields with no true pass catchers, but he runs enough. Maybe they're just running the whole game. Justin Fields, Najee Harris, Shamklin, and then on the other side, Dallas is PPR scam the way. Still also struggling to score. Steelers defense is doing a good job stopping them. Maybe some turnovers, but Ferguson and Lamb are just Dak keys in on his guys. This would be one that nobody's going to really play, but pretty interesting, playable for a large field GPP. I think, yeah, Lipke I think is a pretty strong play tonight. Not going to get super high ownership. Should see a few targets just based on recent usage. Could see his role expanding based on some coach speak. Sounds like they do like him, so maybe a little bit more of a role for Lipke going forward. So I think Lipke very much in play tonight. I like him. All right, I got to go make my lineups. I've got less than 10 minutes left, so went a little bit long here tonight. Appreciate you all sticking with me throughout this. If you haven't already done so, please do subscribe to the YouTube channel. Hit that like button and comment. All of that is very helpful for the algo. So appreciate you guys hanging out with me tonight. Let's go make some lineups. Let's go win some money, and I will be back tomorrow for Monday Night Football.